Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. Thanks everyone for joining us. My name is Philip, and I'll be the guide for this session about fighting high inflation and saving some money now. So I appreciate everyone joining us. If you're in the class live, thanks so much. For those in the lounge, appreciate it. If you want to join us live, you can, or you can ask questions through the lounge, through the chat. And James is with us with GetSetUp, and he'll help monitor any questions through the lounge itself. Also, if you are live streaming with us and are not yet members of GetSetUp, if you would like to find out a little bit more, please go to GetSetUp and find out some more information about us. So you can participate with classes live, ask questions as we go, and be directly involved with the classes. So just trying to get everybody in. A couple of people are still signing in here, just trying to get everyone in. So again, my name is Philip, and we're going to talk about inflation, which is a hot topic now for everyone. And then we'll talk a little bit about saving some ideas for saving some money, because of what inflation causes. So in trying to discuss or talk about inflation, there's probably some tricky things here that I want to make sure we get across. By tricky, I mean maybe not real easy for me to explain. So please, if I'm saying something that doesn't make sense, you're not going to offend me at all. I will just tell me that it's not making sense, and I'll try to explain it in a different way. In regards to that. And I love these classes to be interactive. Me just talking without getting questions, without getting comments, isn't making the class as lively as it should. So I'm sure if you have a question, something that isn't fully making sense, I'm sure other people have that same question. So please feel free to be the one that steps up and asks to talk about it and explain it a little bit more. So I think everybody's in right now that has hit the button to get in. So let's go ahead and get started. So again, my name's Philip. Let's be interactive. So what we're going to talk about is, what is inflation? First, let's understand what inflation is. And then we're going to spend some time about how some of the best ways to fight inflation, figure out how we can change some of our spending habits. And there are lots of ways to do it. Those of us in the GetSetUp environment are usually of a certain age, and we have some of the same challenges. So I'm going to ask you to share some of your favorite inflation fighting tips that you've learned over the last couple of months. And as we get going about inflation, most of us, because of our GetSetUp target audience, most of us have experienced inflation before. We're going to talk about that, maybe go way back to the 1970s and early 1980s, and talk a little bit about inflation then, to help us remember that we've gone through this before. And so unfortunately, we're veterans of this. There's been some other inflation periods, but the last really big one was when we were a lot younger, but most of us were around spending money at that time. So with that, is there anything in particular anyone wants to make sure we cover? Please let me know. We can either speak up or put something in chat, and to make sure we cover any particular questions or ideas that you have. All right, so let's do a little bit of a knowledge check. So do we remember the 1970s style of inflation? So everyone remember that? Gas prices going up, long lines to get gas. I know I was a young teenager then. Only way I got to drive was my parents' car was to get to go wait in gas lines. So we're experiencing some of the same levers that caused back then. So that's why I just wanted to bring up about the 1970s style of inflation. Every inflation is its own beast. Every time we have some inflation, but there are some things to remember. Yes, thanks, Susan, for remembering that I'm not the only one that remembers the gas line. So, so in the 1970s, we experienced the longest stretch of heightened inflation, and it was basically because of two oil spikes, oil price spikes. The first one was an embargo by what became known as OPEC, Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. And then we sort of got over that, but right on the back of that, the second one was a decline in oil production due to the Iranian Revolution and then the Iran-Iraq War. And then just to bring us all back into place, in 1979, Paul Volcker became the chairman of the Federal Reserve and began hiking interest rates to try to bring inflation under control. So we'll talk about that. Why is hiking interest rates try to bring inflation under control? We'll talk about that in a few minutes. So again, those of us that remember interest rates were all the way up to 15, 16, I believe even 17 or 18%. Right now, the Federal Reserve is again hiking interest rates, but interest rates are about 2%. So a big difference in regards to where we are now relative to where we were way back when. So I'm going to click on to help us, or this is a recent website put out by the White House, and they just talk about some of the inflation periods. We've had 6 inflation periods since World War II. So the first one was after World War II, and it was sort of a gleeful time. We had gotten out of the war, very long and painful war, and people were starting to want to buy things to celebrate being through the war. And again, that's one of the main ways inflation goes up, is a lot of people buying things. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Second inflation period was in the early 50s. And then the ones that we're most familiar with, like I said, that long inflation period from April of 1973 to October of 1982. This is the main one that we're thinking about. Relatively minor inflation relative to the others. We had in 89 to 91, and then a short period of time in 2008. So those are the inflation periods we've had since the end of World War II. So this is not a unique thing. Just want to make sure we all understand that this is not the first time we've had inflation. So any questions, any comments? Anybody want to bring up any other recollections they have from some of the prior inflation periods we've had? Please, like I said, feel free to do so.
I'm just wondering, is inflation just a part of our economic system?
Absolutely. As you'll see, I just switched the scenes, and the second one is, is inflation good or bad? And no, we expect to have some inflation. So you're absolutely right. So that, let's just start there. What Coke, a bottle of Coke cost 5 cents, probably about 5 cents in 1960. And now what it cost over $1, depending on what size, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of different choices. It can cost $1, $2, depending where you get it. And that, in essence, is inflation. Rising prices are something that is wanted. For us to grow, we actually want to have some bit of rising prices. The rate of those prices rising is really where the difference between good and bad inflation. The government targets to have approximately 2% inflation a year, want the economy to grow, be more prosperous, the population is rising. We want to have more goods, more services, and it is actually good to have some increase in inflation, to have prices rise. But where it gets bad is where it gets to be where we are now, or where we have been in some of the prior periods, where it gets sort of out of control, out of that 2 or 3%. If we think back just over the last few years, we've sort of been complaining, or we, anyway, the economists, the experts have been complaining that we have hardly been growing. We've been growing at less than 1%, around 1%, and they were complaining that we weren't having enough growth. So yes, to answer that question, to elaborate on your question, yes, there hopefully always actually always is inflation, because the opposite of that is having deflation, having prices go down, which is also, it's like high inflation is a very bad thing. So the cost of goods going up is not in and of itself a bad thing. It's the rate of the increase that can get worrisome and can cause that, what we call inflation, to happen. So absolutely right from that standpoint. So basically, what causes inflation? It is basically, from the typical standpoint, people want to buy things that there isn't enough of, or people have more money than they did before and therefore are willing to pay more than they did before. So basically, the inflation we're in now has basically been caused primarily because after the pandemic, a lot of production stopped, and then all of a sudden it changed very quickly. We went for 2 or 3 months without doing anything, without going anywhere, and then we started realizing that we had to change a little bit. People started buying furniture, people started buying a lot of products, started buying bicycles, started buying exercise equipment. So there wasn't that much of a production going on, and people wanted to buy products. So just like if you're selling, say you make some jewelry and you're selling it for $10 and you're selling a little bit, not too much, that's great. But if all of a sudden you're selling out of whatever the product is you're making and you're selling it for $10 each time you sell a piece of jewelry, in my example, and you're selling out of it, you're probably going to raise your prices to $11 or $12, because ideally what you want to do is make as much money as you can without slowing down how much product people are buying. So if you can sell out of all the jewelry, you can make it $10, you're going to raise your price up to $11 or $12. If you're still selling out everything, you're going to raise the price some more. At some point, that price, let's say it's $15, where now you're not selling all your jewelry. So you've sort of reached the highest price you can get. So that's basically what happened. It started with furniture. It started with exercise equipment. It went to cars, where the production wasn't as good as it should have been. And so the way you counteract that, the people that are selling them are going to raise their prices, because there are more people asking for their product than they actually have product. So to take advantage of that, they're going to raise the prices. So let's stop there. Questions, comments? All right, so that's basically what happened in this one, is this type of inflation, where basically we had more money out there. I definitely don't want to get into the political realm one way or the other, but there was more dollars out there. So we had more money once we started working again. We had saved some money because we weren't spending any money for 2 or 3 months, and now we changed our lifestyle. And I think the perfect example was the exercise equipment and furniture. We were buying more because we were inside our house more, and we started doing that. And that, at least from my perspective, sort of started this a little bit of prices going up in that inflation spiral. The worst thing about inflation is the fear that it's never going to stop, or it's not going to stop. And that's where the challenge is we're in right now, is trying to cut off the fear of inflation. Because if we feel that inflation is going to continue to go up, prices are going to go up, we're going to ask for more in our salary or wages. And then that's going to cause more money to come into play, which is then actually going to raise the price of products, because again, we have more money buying those products. So I'm willing to spend more money. Since I have more money in my pocket, what I was willing to spend $10 on before, I'm willing to spend $11 or $12 on now. So that's the fear of the inflation. Again, that inflation being that the cost, the rate of the increase, that 1 or 2%, 2 or 3% inflation is not bad. As a matter of fact, most governments, including the United States government, wants that to happen. So once we get up where we are now, that we have a challenge or a problem. So typically other ways that, inflation can happen can be, government spending or global issues. The good example was from the 70s, where the global issue was something we had no control over, but the gas prices, they limited gas and it made it more scarce. So people wanted to pay or were willing to pay more to get that gas because there was less gas out there. So people were pushing forward to pay more to get the gas they wanted. So how do we measure inflation? We hear that where the government said, inflation was at 9% a year 2 months ago, and now it went down slightly to 8.7 or 8.8% a year. So that's how we measure inflation, or that's how the percentages come out. So how do we measure inflation is we look at what things cost month over month, year over year. So they're looking at gas prices, they're looking at rent, on average, they're looking furniture, clothing, medical expenses, all that. So remember, when we say what we pay for things, there's goods, hard products that we buy, gas, etc. And then there's services that we may get, medical services. We may have to pay an attorney for legal services. So the goods and services are both usually going up during inflationary times at a higher rate than normal, when we have what we call inflation that is causing some problems. So that's basically how inflation is measured each month. The government goes out and gets the average price for the same, what they call basket of goods every month, and seeing how much these items cost this month relative to last month and also relative to last year. And that's how they measure how much inflation is going up. And that's when we see the reports where, as it was earlier this week or late last week, they said that inflation was now at 8.8%, down from about 9.2%, I believe was the number. So that's how inflation gets measured. So what does the government try to do to stop inflation? I referenced earlier about the chair of the Federal Reserve. So the Federal Reserve is the part of the United States, and for the United States, the Federal Reserve is part of government. They are supposedly independent from Congress and from the president. The president and Congress approve of the people that are on the Federal Reserve, but once they are elected or selected for the reserve, and they have usually a 5-year term, then they do what they think is right for the economy. So the typical thing that the Federal Reserve will do when they feel inflation is too high, the rate of that price increase is too high, they will start having interest rates go higher. So this is the tricky part. So basically, if interest rates go higher, that means it's going to cost more for us to borrow money. So basically what this means is that if I'm a business, we talked about that jewelry that I was making before. If I need to borrow money to buy some of my products to make my jewelry, if the interest rates are higher, it's going to cost me more to do it. It's going to slow down how much I basically make. So remember, inflation is that there's too much money out there chasing the products. So making the interest rates higher is going to slow down what I can do. Now, for me to go out and buy a car, instead of paying 3 or 4% interest rates, I may be paying 7 or 8% in interest rates. So it's going to be harder for me to buy a car. I'm going to have to spend less money because the interest rates are more. My monthly payment's going to be more. Interest rates on houses to get a mortgage will go up. So basically, by raising the interest rates, is having everything slow down. If I'm not going to buy a house that maybe I would have bought before, or buy a smaller house because interest rates are higher, I'm going to buy less furniture. All types of things are going to happen. I'm going to buy less appliances. I'm going to buy less furniture. I'm going to end up buying less gasoline. I'm not going to travel as far because interest rates are going up, and it is basically strangling the economy to some extent. So questions, there's got to be some questions here. Again, this is something it's a little bit difficult to explain. So how can I clarify any of this? Any questions? Either put it in the chat or just speak up, please. All right, so all this happens at some point, the rates will go down, but here's where the trick comes in, right? Is that we want to, the government wants to slow down these rate increases, but if they raise interest rates too high, they're really going to strangle the economy, and all of a sudden it goes down, and then we get into the opposite of that inflation, where we have that recession where people start losing their jobs because now the companies can't make as many products because of the high rate of interest. People aren't buying as many products, so they start laying off workers, start laying off employees. So that's the fine line, is the Federal Reserve wants to raise interest rates for a period of time and get it right to slow down the economy. But if they don't raise interest rates enough, the economy continues to go and will have high inflation. If they raise interest rates too much, they will slow the economy too much. And that's what we're hearing a lot in the news reports right now, is the government, the Federal Reserve, is trying to thread the needle, is trying to get that rate of increase of interest rates to be just right, so they slow down the economy but don't strangle the economy. And their primary way of doing that is by increasing interest rates. Now, what's most interesting now, of course, is that interest rates have been extremely low for an extremely long period of time. And so even though they're raising interest rates right now, they're still not very high compared to what we, especially as GetSetUp environment people, have seen over the life of our time here in fighting inflation and going through all kinds of different periods. So interest rates are still relatively low, but they have been raising them slowly over the past year, and they're right now indicating they're going to continue to increase rates because inflation has not been brought down. So that's the primary way that they're going to fight, is to try to slow down the economy by raising interest rates, which basically makes it harder for production of products, but more importantly, it makes it harder for us as private individuals to buy as much as we did before, because we borrow is going to cost more money. Right.
Would it
So,
is it physically possible for the economy to go on indefinitely the way it was? And if it could, what would the consequence have been?
meaning
You know,
the way
with everything seems so good. At least to the consumer, it seemed good.
right. Well, I think you're talking about like pre-pandemic, or are you talking, I mean, so, you know, pre-pandemic, I think things were, I would agree that things were going good. Inflation was relatively low. It was usually around 1%. The government would have ideally liked it to be a little bit higher, but again, that's hard to thread that needle. So could it go on forever? In theory, yes. But as we saw when we started the session, you know, we've already, since the end of World War II, we've had 6 different periods of inflation. So that's what, over the last 80 years, there's been 6 different times that we had inflation. So what happens is the economy is going along at a nice steady rate, and then some bump is going to happen. In this case, it happened to be the pandemic, or more importantly, when we came out of the pandemic. But if it hadn't been that, maybe it would have been the war between Russia and Ukraine, because that's hurt the gas supply. And we know from prior experience, the gasoline prices are a quick indicator. One of the reasons gas and prices are so important, it's not only that you and I buy gas for our car, but all products are shipped using gas. Almost all products are shipped using gas. A lot of petroleum products are used in the manufacture of a lot of goods. So that's why gas prices are so important, because it's not just you and I buying gas. It's used in a lot of commercial production and transportation cost also. So could it go on forever? Yes, in theory it could, but in practice, something is going to happen at some point, just based on history, i.e. the last 80 years, we've had seven different other spikes in inflation before this one. So something was going to happen to cause it. Yes, Shannon.
I have a comment. Yes, the stock market was really going gangbusters, but the bond market was not doing so hot, and neither were the interest rates for just cash savings was awful. So, I would rather have a middle ground there. I don't think it was always so, wonderful before the pandemic, as far as the economy and we also didn't have, the job market wasn't really hot. It was pretty tight. So, I mean, it was good, but it was still hard for people to get in and be able to take advantage of new jobs and get promotions and stuff. So, there is a silver lining to this. There really is. And I think we have to look at that too. And hopefully we'll get the inflation under control.
Right. And so, that was another cause of, you're right. That's why maybe the cost was only about 1%. Inflation was only rising 1%, and maybe wasn't good, typically good enough. The other point to make that you brought up is that wages started going up, right? Because people weren't working after the pandemic for various reasons. And now employers, when they started hiring again, had to pay more in wages. So therefore, you and I as employees have more money. And that's another thing that caused that inflation. Not only they weren't making as many products, but we also had more money in our pockets because the average wages were going up. So those two things probably magnified the two together, really made that big jump happen so quickly.
Right.
Would be an idea from some people.
Yeah, it's extremes that none of us like.
Right. And Olson is saying, let's see, the government pumps a ton of money into the economy. Can increasing interest rates impact that inflation? So yeah, if you look at the classic ways that inflation happens, one of them is what's called the money supply, Olson, which is merely the government pumping, using your words, good words, more money into the economy. So yes, bringing more money into the economy, basically, we talked about inflation is more money chasing the same amount of goods, or the same amount of money chasing less goods. So yes, the government pumping money into the economy can impact inflation. And that's why the government typically wants to, have that fine balance again. So, they can put more money into the economy. Another thing the government can do is spend more money than they did before. That can be inflationary. A lot of the experts were surprised, to the point that Shannon just made a second ago. A lot of the experts were surprised in that the government was spending some money before and inflation was not going up. And they were almost worried that it wasn't going up enough, and it was an unusual type of situation. And then all of a sudden, so the point before about could we just go on forever the way we were? It's really hard, because something is going to happen to cause it to change. Sometimes we have control over it, sometimes we don't. typically we don't have control over it, i.e. gas prices going up, or we having the pandemic messed everything up, messed up the equilibrium we were in, and all of a sudden caused higher wages, less product. So more people had more money and they were buying less product because of the pandemic. So that's really what, at least in my opinion, and most of the experts' opinion, is what caused the inflation that we're in now. So, yep. Olson, you say money supply, government spending, and then some outside issue are usually the typical things that cause that rate of inflation to go up at a higher rate, and then gets us nervous from that standpoint. So excellent point. Yeah, so Susan's saying, what good are higher prices if everything costs more? And that's exactly, that spiral that I talked about that everybody's really worried about. If prices are going up 6%, then I want to get a 7% increase to cover those expenses. And if I get a 7% increase, then the prices are going to go up even more. And that's what they call that inflationary spiral. And that's where the big problem comes in, because now I'm expecting everything to go up, so I'm going to want more money. And so that's what right now the government is trying to stop, that anticipation of inflation continuing to go up, so people will not continue to ask for higher and higher wages. And that's exactly where you're hitting the exact mark. And this is what the Federal Reserve is trying to figure out. So they want to raise those interest rates to slow stuff down, but they don't want to raise it too much or too fast to make a recession happen where people start getting laid off from work. So this is exactly that fine tuning. There's no scientific way to do this. We'll have inflation again that's sort of out of control, and we'll bring it down some, but everyone brings its own little worries into it here. And we have things from the pandemic to the war in Russia, a lot of different things, to the oil supplies being hit because of the war. All those things are contributing to the challenges to make this inflation unique, and we have to figure out how to bring it under control. But we're exactly right. All right, so the effects of inflation on our daily lives. So a lot of us, again, the GetSetUp environment, we're in retirement, close to retirement, et cetera. So we can't even ask, as Susan talked about, we can't even ask for a higher wages because we're not working. Now we do if we are getting Social Security, that the Social Security amount can change every year, and it's based on those inflation. We talked about how inflation is measured. So we could get an increase from that standpoint. Interest rates may go up. As Shannon talked about, maybe interest rates go up, so our bonds pay more money. So we can get some more money. But just like the point of, if inflation is going up at 7%, we're only gaining 6%, we're still losing some money. So, that's how it affects us in our daily life from that standpoint. So we got to look at ways that we can save some money. So that's what I want to talk about next, if we feel comfortable with where we are right now. So just to talk about some other things that we have. So how can we look at our spending? So I'm just going to throw out a lot of things. I'm actually would like for you to help me out, and the next slide will even say it, but I'm just going to throw out a couple of things that on how we might be able to curtail our spending. Some of these you've already heard of, I'm sure. Just want to make sure everybody's covered them. Some of them may be new to you. And I want you to be thinking about some of the other things you've done, and I would love for you to share them after we talk about a couple of these things, or at any point, just share some of the things you're doing. But, some of the classic things from store, grocery prices have really gone up. So I've sort of broken this down as some grocery things, we might be able to buy in bulk or buy store brands. I'm a little bit of I'll use the word on myself, a little bit of a food snob and like to buy name brand products, but with inflation, we started to buy some store brand products, and actually with most of them, I can't tell a difference. And usually if you read some of the research, they're the store brands are manufactured by the same companies that have the name brands. They just don't have the same expenses and all the advertising and the fancy labeling. So a lot of the stuff is really the same. Just the branding from the stores can make it cost less. GetSetUp environment, we're a little bit older. Let's make sure that we can still clip some paper coupons, but there aren't that many out there anymore. They're now mostly electronic coupons. Those are actually easier to use. You don't have to worry about dragging them to the store. They're right there on your phone. So let's not be afraid. There's lots of ways to get electronic coupons, and I'm happy to talk about some, and from some other classes I've given, a lot of you have some other ideas on how you do coupons also. So if you have any questions on that, we can do it. Should we eat at home more? Maybe if we go out 3 nights a week now, maybe we should only go out 2 nights a week. We know it costs more to eat out than it does to cook and eat at home. So those are some of the classic things from a grocery store environment. Some of the others is, according to the government, we in the United States, we throw away between 30 and 40% of the food that we buy. Without using it, it goes bad. So you may want to think of some ways of, indeed, some people, obviously that's an average. So some people have less than that. Some people have more than that. If you're throwing away a lot of food, you might want to come up with some way, one day a week before you go grocery shopping, make sure to use some of your products that are just about to go bad before they do, or, maybe you rearrange your refrigerator as you see something that's, starting to go bad, just bring it up to the front of the refrigerator. You're more likely to use it. But just think of some food waste items and how we can control our food waste and use the food that we bought, because the groceries have gone up so much. Anything else on groceries that people are doing they want to share with the rest of the group? I'd greatly appreciate it. Stephanie talks about meal preparation helps. Absolutely right. The old saying of, if you want to go get your grocery list out based on you're going to make specific things that week, have your grocery list match that. So that's that meal preparation that Stephanie is talking about. And that's another good way to work on that. Anything else that people are doing from a grocery standpoint? There's another thing that some people have talked about before is, the online shopping for groceries became more prevalent while we were in the pandemic. Now that cost a decent amount of money to get your groceries online. So a lot of people are stopping that now. But some people, again, you have to understand your own personality and how you deal with money. Some people have told me that paying the $30, whatever it is, to have their groceries delivered actually saves them money, because they understand they're impulse shoppers at the grocery store. They buy things they don't really need or weren't on their grocery list. And for some people, just not going to the grocery store, it's worth spending some money to either go pick up your groceries or have them delivered, because you will actually save money by not doing so much impulse shopping. So that won't work for most of us, but for a few, if we have a lot of impulse shopping, that's just something to think about. So electricity, power is another big thing that's really gone up. So we all know about the AC, especially now in the summertime. Can we raise up our air conditioner some? It's not a big savings, but basically the government says if you raise your air conditioning by 1 degree, it does save 2% on your electrical bill for every 1 degree you do. You might want to consider the low flow shower heads. It's not so much the water, but what it is the hot water. You're really paying a lot for that hot water to get the water heated up. So if you have the lower flow shower heads, your less hot water is having to be made by your hot water heater. And then one that I just found, this is from the Department of Energy. It says, fans cool people, not rooms. I found that to be an interesting one. So basically what they're saying is if nobody's in the house, having the fans whirling away are not really going to help. They cool us and don't cool the room. I did not know that. It's just a new one that I just picked up on. So just something to consider. So going back, somebody asked what's the browser extension. I skipped that one, so I was going to come back to it, but thanks for keeping me honest, Sylvia. So the browser extension, that deals with buying things online. So if we're going to buy something online, we might as well get the best price for it. So browser extension, these are apps that you would put on your desktop or your laptop or your smartphone, wherever you buy things online. So basically, you do need to put an app on. The two most popular apps that doing this are one called Honey, spelled just like the money, I'm sorry, just like the food product. Another one's called Retail Me Not. And basically you would put those on. And what happens if you have those apps on your phone or your desktop or laptop, when you go online and buy something, put something in your shopping cart, it goes behind the scenes and is checking for any and all coupons that may be valid for whatever you just put in your shopping cart. Now you can do that yourself. In the old days, you had to do that, but it can take 20 or 30 minutes to try to find there. If you go online and say, what are coupons for Best Buy, you might get 10 different coupons and you got to put each one in and see if it works. So this is doing all that electronically. And once it finishes, it usually takes about 20 or 30 seconds. They will say, you've got the best price, or we found the code for free shipping, we've put it in for you, or we found the 15% discount on this product, we put the code in, whatever. So that's what a browser extension is. Capital One, the credit card company, has been doing this for a few months with their credit card company or their credit card customers. They now have expanded that, so it's the same thing as the two I just referenced. I'll put all three of these names in the closing notes. Capital One, now you don't have to be a Capital One customer to have them do that same type of thing. So that's what the browser extensions or the apps are. If you're going to buy something anyway, we might as well get the best price, and let's have the computer do the dirty work for us and try to go find that best price so we don't have to do it ourselves and spend a lot more time.
Thank you.
Sure. So a lot of us have the smart thermostats connected, connected to the house. Now they're starting the way they can be on the internet, so you can, make sure you've raised up the air conditioner when you're out of the house for a few hours, and then obviously if you get back, it's a really hot day, you can have it start to crank up just before you get home by controlling it on the internet. So those are some of the electricity savings that I thought were of interest. Any other tricks that people are doing about saving electricity? And another one, this is pretty labor intense, but some people have brought it up to me. One of the biggest draws on electricity is your dryer. So, some people have gone, again, this is, it's whatever your personality is, how much money you need to save or you want to save. As some people are, not using their dryers much now, and getting other ways, so to speak, to dry their clothes or some of their clothes. So just other things to think about. And Sharon is talking about that. She usually air dries her clothes. And another great one is very good. Unplug items that you aren't using, or at least turn them off. There's a lot of little things that are going on now. A lot of our electronic things, everything from our, the streaming services we have, et cetera, that we have on our internet provider and all that is running. It's on all the time. So especially something like that, if we're going on vacation for a couple of weeks, you might want to consider unplugging it. I know I have a couple of lights here in my house where they just automatically had that little sensor that came on, so you could see the plug when you came in if it was dark. And we don't use those lamps anyway, so I've just unplugged them for right now. So you can do those little things like that. Exactly right, Stephanie. Thanks for bringing that up. Stephanie asks, is turning something off, the surge protector, better than unplugging it? I'm not an expert in that. I haven't done the research. I haven't gotten that question. I believe if you're turning it off at the surge suppressor. The surge suppressor turns off by itself if something happens. So if you turn off that power cord where you have it, that's the same thing as turning it off completely, if I'm understanding your question correctly. But usually the surge protector is when it itself kicks itself off. So I'm not sure I have a good answer for that question, Stephanie. I'll have to do some research on that. Another thing I know is some of the power companies, I know my mother lives in Florida and they do it. And I live in Chicago, and our power company here is doing it. They'll send text alerts to us and saying we're going to be in a high peak power period now. If you use less power, you will get a rebate on your credit bill or on your power bill, I should say. And I just this last month got not much, but I got like $1 off for not using quite as much. And I didn't really do anything different. But you can maybe get something along those lines too. So another thing with the power. So every little bit helps. We talked about groceries. I'm not a big one and nobody else brought it up either. I don't like to drive to 3 different grocery stores to try to save, 10 cents on bananas. You waste a lot of gas, in my opinion, as well as time. And buying energy efficient appliances and the newer light bulbs too. It's one of the things I give another class talking some of these things, and buying those energy efficient light bulbs, they cost more, but they last a lot longer. And especially as we get older, as we put them up in ceiling fixtures and stuff, we get to climb less chance of falling down off the ladder. A lot of good possible savings from that, using my mother-in-law as an example, who did quite a few years ago fall while she was trying to change a light bulb. So yep, lots of things like that. And it's pretty hard now not to buy energy efficient appliances. But the good point is, if you have some older ones and you're trying to stream them out a little bit longer, you might find out that indeed you are actually wasting a lot of electricity, and it is time to go ahead and buy that new one. So gas apps, this is typically on your phone, where Gas Buddy is the biggest one, where you can sit there and find out what gas prices are around. So I've never been a big advocate of. I tried Gas Buddy a long time ago when it first came out, and for me to save a few pennies and drive 2 or 3 miles out of the way didn't seem like that big of a deal. However, based on gas prices going up, I've reinstalled a gas app. And right now, with gas prices fluctuating so much, it is amazing. Again, as I referenced earlier, I live in Chicago, and I can find gas station. First, the gas app is better now. You can restrict how far you want to look. You can look at 2-mile radius, 3-mile radius, whatever you want. So you don't end up getting stuff for 10 miles away, which doesn't make any sense. But with gas prices fluctuating so much, it's amazing. There is 30 or 40% cents difference in gas prices, I found out, with gas stations within half a mile of each other. I was just down in Florida, just came back yesterday visiting my mother, and I was in a rental car, and just driving between where my mother was, where she lives, and where I was staying, as I was going to fill up my car before I went to the airport. There was actually, I wasn't even using my gas buddy. I was just driving by. There are a lot of gas stations. There was a 90 cents difference. And with 5 gas stations that I drove by just on my trip, it was about a 5-mile trip. There was a 90 cents difference between the lowest and the highest gas price. And this is just me doing it all at the same time. That's a big chunk of money. That's per gallon. So the gas app does that for you. It gives you the best price. So again, I'm not an advocate of driving 10, 15 miles out of your way to save a couple pennies in gas, but if you can save 40, 50, 60 cents a gallon by driving half a mile, maybe worth it for you. You have to decide. And Stephanie's on a roll right now, talking about gas prices at Costco, Sam Clubs, BJ's. Again, I'm living in downtown Chicago. We don't have too many of those, but as I do, other people have brought that up. Indeed, using some of the more efficient places in regards to gas can really help, because they are they are bringing down the prices. So, yep, lots of good things there to think about. And I was personally surprised about how much the gas prices are vary within a short distance of each other. So recurring bills. So these are, primary example is streaming services now. A lot of us bought a lot of streaming services in the pandemic. It could be your health insurance. It could be, news you get on your app, whatever. Just make sure that you're using the streaming services you're paying for. A lot of us, it goes on our credit card. It gets charged every month. We sort of forget about it. I've given another class for a while, similar to this one, about just reducing your expenses unrelated to inflation. And there's a study that I just found in regards to that class where people on average think they're spending about $80 a month on streaming services. In reality, they're spending over $200. This was, people were asked how much they were, and then they actually looked at their bills. So just think about your reoccurring bills. Spend a few minutes looking at your credit card statement next time. Go through all those reoccurring expenses. And if you're not using some of them, cancel them. Think about the streaming services. If you end up canceling them and then you decide you want them again, you can reapply. They'll be more than happy to bring you back online. There's no contract with most of the streaming services. They're relatively easy to cancel. If you can't figure out how to do it, just put cancel, whatever the product is, and it will usually come up, and it's usually not more than a 3-step process to go back into their website and cancel it. So just things to think about. And some of the bigger things that cause a little more time, a little more energy maybe, but if you're really tight with your money is, some of the things, there's wants versus needs, right? Needs are things that we need to live every day. We need to have our rent, our mortgage, whatever. We need to have insurance. We need to have grocery, food to eat with. And then wants are the things that we want but don't necessarily have to have. Or, clothes would be an example. We do have to have some clothes, but we don't have to have a whole closet full of clothes. We don't need to go necessarily buy a new shirt today, unless there's some special event. So just look at some of your wants and maybe slow them down a little bit. Maybe say, you know what, I'm not going to buy any clothes for the next 2 months right now while inflation is sort of high. I'm tight on money. I have plenty of clothes right now. We talked about before, maybe not going out as much for restaurants or restaurant food. That again is a want versus a need. So if you're really struggling right now, just look at your wants versus your needs and see if you can slow down on some of those wants right now. Stephanie talks about she wasn't using her newspapers and she just canceled it. So excellent, Steph. I encourage you. You're saving some paper also, so helping the environment, and you're helping yourself with some money. I'm just laughing about what you say. You just toss in the recycle. At least you're recycling it, right? So perfect though. That's the kind of thing that we sort of get in that habit where you're used to paying it, and I like at least the fact you're recycling it. So thanks so much. Another thing is vehicles, especially now, most of us are in the retirement phase or close to the retirement phase, or we're working from home more. One of the biggest savings you can have is by reducing by one vehicle you have in your household. I know that's rather extreme, but it really can work, and it really saves a lot of money. Car payment, insurance, you're going to use less gas because you have one car instead of 2 cars. All the government licensing fees, all that, it saves a big chunk of money, obviously depending on what your car payment is or whatever, but you can save $300, $400, $500, $600 a month. Now I know it's a hard step for some of us. So, and again, I live in a big city. It's easier for me than maybe if you live way out in the country somewhere where you really have to have 2 cars and a 2-car family. But I would at least encourage you to look at it, think about it, maybe just hide your keys for one of the cars for 3 weeks and see how much of a challenge it is. You don't want to sell the vehicle without at least experimenting with it. At least I don't think you should, just to make sure. But see if you can't make it work. Really push it. Don't give out easily. If it's sort of partly working, just really try to push it, and you might be surprised. And again, we know used car prices are going up right now. So if you can sell one of your cars, you're going to get more money for it now than you would have not too long ago. So Stephanie's not buying that idea quite as much as she did the subscription services. So yeah, it's just something to think about. And this is especially if you feel that you really are in a tight spot, you know, quite candidly, if you really need to save a lot of money, you've got to go to your big expenses. And your two basic expenses are our home and our vehicles. And I'm not even talking about the home, Stephanie. If you don't like the car, imagine telling you to downsize your house. That's even a bigger one. So, but just think about it. And the final one I just put here, this is one that my wife and I always have a discussion on, is, you know, when is a sale not really a good purchase? It's when you don't need it anyway, right? You can save 40% on something you could have saved 100% on by not buying it. So my whole point is we're a little bit older, we're wiser, we're smarter. You know, let's do things to satisfy ourselves. And, you know, not to be influenced by the word sale or influenced by what our neighbors are buying or whatever. So just some of the things that just want you to stimulate your thought. None of these are going to work for everybody, including me. But just try to stimulate thought. You might come up with some other ideas based on your personality and how you interact with money. Another one we talked about is budgeting. If you know where your money is going, it makes it a lot easier to figure out how you can stop spending some money in some areas, right? If you don't understand where your money is going, it's very hard to influence your spending. And I do give another session with GetSetUp about budgeting. It should come up again probably in a few weeks. It's not on the schedule right now, but if you want to talk a little bit more about that, you know, look for the budgeting class. We can talk about it there. All right, buy one, get one free. Okay, we're okay with that, right? That one is, again, as long as you're going to use both of them, it's a good deal. I can't argue with that one. So, but I appreciate everybody. A combination of good things and a little bit of humor here helps the class a little. Go. So, any other comments? So, just a quick little summary. Remember, this is not our first experience with inflation for most of us. So let's go back into our memory cells, think about what we did in some of the prior times we had inflation and how we worked around it. It can help us think about some other ways and be creative now. And then remember, prices going up, you know, it's the rate that they're going up, not the fact that they're going up. Basically, we do want an increase in prices over a long period of time, just not as high as they are right now. Lots of resources we can use. Some of the apps we talked about, gas buddies, electronic coupons, just let's use our smartphone smartly, so to speak, to help us. We didn't have all these tools back in the 70s and 80s. So let's take advantage of some, we talked about, let's go back to our old experiences, but let's understand that there are new tools and resources now, and let's use those also. And then we talked about at the end, if you understand where your money is going, it helps you identify areas you can focus on. And again, just do what's right for you in regards to adapting your spending. It's something you love. You know, we all hear if you stop buying coffee every day, you can save so much. If you love that coffee, then, you know, if it's worth the money, keep doing it. Just figure out some things that you don't care as much about, and then maybe stop those. But I'm not asking us if something is our favorite thing in the day to do is to, you know, go out for dinner once a week or get coffee when we go out, and that's fine. If you really love it, enjoy it, just figure out some other places. You know, most of us have worked for a long time. We're in some of the best years of our life. Let's enjoy it, but just figure out things that we really don't enjoy so much, like maybe get a newspaper.